We have language, we have concepts to describe the myriad things being experienced, and including a self. But the inquiry is, let's start with experience. What is this experientially? What is the actual experience? And that's all we can actually investigate. What's actually here? It can't be denied that something's here. It's like an actual palpable presence that's here. We could call it life, certainly, existence. What is it that we're experiencing when we describe any element of it? But what is it? There's really no answer to that question ultimately, but it's powerful to see that we don't arrive at a final conclusion when we feel our way into what's here, what's present. What's actually palpably here is just here with no precedent. And so in a sense, it's without context. It's without any prior framework of knowledge to contextualize it. Like the starting point is this. It's really fun and illuminating to come back to the bare bones actuality of this instant, of this explosion of reality. It's a state of constant becoming, this constant opening, but it actually never quite becomes anything definite because it doesn't stop. I mean, it's astonishing to just feel that. Are you holding still? Like, as a being? The beingness it's alive, isn't it? So how could you define anything that you call the self? You can't grasp hold of it because there's not something there to grasp hold of. Just look. Just look and see that the ways we categorize people, places, and things is a nice fantasy, but it's not an actuality.
This is Nick Hyam from nisargayoga.com. You're listening to the Non-Duality Podcast. Today's episode is presented by Paul Dobson. He's joined again by John Astin for another fresh and immediate appreciation of this.
What actually am I? What is existence? What does it mean to exist? What can we say for absolute certain right now about what we are?
We could call what's here life, right? We could call the presence of what's here existence. It's a nice word, and it has a certain, but if we even go like a step further back, we could just say, what does that even mean? Like what, to say it's life or to say it's existence, in a sense is also meaningless because I don't know what that means. I mean, I could say something to suggest that I know what it means, but I think what's closer to the bone of reality is that something's here. Something's showing up. In other words, something's present. There's an actuality that's here. It can't be denied that something's here because here is here. Here is whatever it is that is here, is here. There's a kind of, we call it like the positivity in the sense of like, yes, it's like an actual palpable presence that's here, something. We could call it life, certainly, existence. But it's so interesting because we kind of often start from the premise when we're engaging in, when people engage in spirituality, let's say, of one kind or another, of I'm essentially taking what's here and trying to make it into something, make it better, make it more of whatever we imagine it should be more of, more awake, more conscious, more open, more indivisible, if we've heard that, it's indivisible, or somehow just improve upon it, right? Make it better, make it more spiritual, make it more enlightened, make it more free, happier, these things that humans are seeking, and then sort of wanting to take what's here and sort of turn it into that, or just, and it's like, what about inquiring into, before we jump to that assumption that it should be improved or can be improved, needs to be improved, like, well, what is it that we're wanting to improve? What's actually here? And it seems like a kind of like some people will, it strikes them as like well, that's kind of an odd question, but it's actually the question to me. What actually is this? And that, of course, includes you could say the full field of what's here, which would also encompass any sense we have of being a subject or a self. So we can absolutely pose the same question that you did initially, which is, who are we? And but what's interesting is that if we investigate anything that's present, including a self, including objects, including experiences, that we end up coming up with the same, find the same thing, curiously.
Yeah, it's like, who am I, or what am I, is synonymous with what is this. It's not two separate things. It's not like, when you really look into it anyway, at first glance it seems that way, and your thoughts and concepts will tell you there's two separate things. There's an inner and an outer world, and
right.
But actually, it's seamless. You can't pick one thing out, surgically remove it from the rest of it. It's all a seamless whole, flowing together as one happening, isn't it? It's
right. And the inquiry, that I'm always inviting folks into is sort of let's start with experience. That's what we're investigating. Like, we're not investigating what the self is or what the world is. We're investigating our experience, because that's what we can actually investigate, at least experientially. I mean, other things we can investigate, analytically and intellectually, and that's wonderful. But this is an experiential, like, what is this experientially? Like, because even we could have lots of ideas about what the self is, but what we think of as ourselves is starts with a felt sense of being a self. And then we imagine all sorts of things about that which is being experienced. So what is the actual experience? And that's true of whether we investigate some state of mind. It's the same thing. We're investigating our experience of that state of mind. That's all we can actually investigate, is the experience.
Yeah. That's all we've got, isn't it? I mean, it's literally all we've got. It's our main investigation tool, and it's what this is, and it's what we have is experience. To start unnecessarily abstracting things outside of that, like a world, an individual person, other people, and all of this. Well, you've opened that universal can of worms, haven't you? Then, and you've got the 10,000 things, right? Right. And as Nick and I often say, this is just about keeping it really, really simple, actually, and just this. And experience is a good word, because it's just, you can't really can't be misinterpreted very easily. Experience. I mean, that's, everyone can go, okay, so what can I say for sure now? Experience. It's a word
for the something is happening that I was saying earlier.
Yes.
It's like we could call that experience, certainly. And it is a good word, and it doesn't feel very loaded. It doesn't have a lot of connotations of philosophy or theology or metaphysics or anything. It's just experience. It's like, well, are you having an experience? And pretty much everyone would say, yes, I'm having an experience of something, but what is it that we're experiencing when we describe any element of it? We call it X, Y, or Z. We have language, we have concepts to describe the myriad things being experienced, and including a self. But what is it? When you say, what is it constituted of? And there's really no answer to that question ultimately, but it's powerful to see that. It's powerful to see that we don't arrive at a final conclusion of what it is when we look for it, when we investigate it, when we sort of feel our way into what's here, what's present, whether we call it life or experience or a self or another person, or when we encounter all the various flavors of life, you could say, right? Because life has it shows up as flavored, it shows up as distinctive. All the waves of experience show up as having various, that's the nature of life, is to show up as differently textured, qualitatively distinct from one phenomena to the next, right? And whether they're the flavors of food or the flavors of emotions or the flavors of thought or the flavors of sound, and light, and I mean, all of it is everywhere we turn. We see what appears as distinctive textures of this experiencing that's present here, and it's astonishing to investigate the textures again, and I mean, I've got this word for it. Like I call it joy, and it's a texture. You could say a flavor of that particular wave that we call joy, the wave of experience. It rises up and is encountered and felt. We have a label for it, and but what is it actually? Like what is joy? And well, there's no saying what it actually is. I mean, because when you go to look for whatever it is that makes up that particular flavor, you come up empty-handed, which is very odd. It's like you think that if you looked, you would find the answer to what it is, right? That's how we tend to think of, an investigation like that. If I look hard enough, I'll finally come up with the answer. What is it that makes joy and not sadness? But it's really trippy because it's almost the opposite. It is the opposite, that the closer you look, the less clear it is as to what it actually is. It gets more ambiguous. It gets fuzzier. Something that starts out very specifically, I know exactly what that is. It's very specifically joy, right? It has a certain flavor to it. It's recognizable. Okay. Then, okay, well, what is it I'm recognizing? It's weird because it's like, you just know that you're recognizing a flavor.
Yeah.
You can tell, I feel joyful today, John, And that's the power of the seeming power of language and concepts, is that they kind of lead us to believe that we have a handle, on it because we have a name for it. Like, I know what that is.
Yeah.
Here's the name for it. It's whatever it is, including a self, including imagining a world, and a self living in that world. I mean, we've got it all figured out. we know what things are. And, but do we actually?
What's the starting point of all of that? What is, because you follow the story back and you go, where did all this start? Like, where did these stories about myself in a world and what I know joy is and what I know sadness is and what anything is actually, like, where did that's just come out of nowhere? I've just been making it up. I've been winging my whole life because everyone else is winging it. And so you've got, someone at the beginning somewhere knew what was happening. So
right.
we just assumed they knew what was happening. So we're just kind of following them, and they didn't know what was happening. They're just kind of, it's come out of thin air. Like, and you start looking into these things, and as you say, they get stranger and stranger. They become more and more ambiguous and indistinct and fuzzy, and you can't, to the point where, yes, obviously there is a flavor, isn't there, to joy? There's undoubtedly flavors to joy and sadness. Mm-hmm. But when you really go into them, what they're made, it's like, what is the building blocks of these things? What are they made of? Exactly. What is the life force behind them?
That's a good way to put it. The building blocks. But it's interesting because you were saying, like, the starting point, made me think that, and one way just to say, to preface this, that, I feel as if, like, I'm playing around with you with different perspectives, in a sense, on reality, on what this is. And, we already know the consensus perspective is that we've kind of figured out, in a sense, because of all the names we have for of the apparent phenomena of life. That's just, we don't have to talk a whole lot about that because it's already sort of, we're operating, that's sort of the consensus view of things. There's there's people, places, and things, and they have independent existence, and there's cause effect, and there's time and space, but that's kind of the human knowledge, and we're all operating kind of from that those assumptions. But what about playing around with a perspective where we start with what's actually here rather than any kind of prior context of knowledge? We can't really get rid of that because that knowledge is just here. It's like, sort of baked into consciousness at this point, right? Like, I'm not going to forget that I'm a human, or I'm not going to forget that I'm sitting in a room, or this is a computer. It doesn't seem like, maybe unless, I get hit over the head hard enough or something. But but the immediacy of this instant with no precedent, no prior incident, because the prior incidents are like, this is a fun, sort of koan. Like, how do you know that there's a prior incident? Like something that came before this? Well, it's something of an abstraction. And what's actually palpably here is just here with no precedent, right? It's just here. And so in a sense, it's without context. It's without any prior framework of knowledge to contextualize it. Like, the starting point is this, and in a sense, you can't possibly know what it is because there's no prior context to know what it is, actually, not experientially.
No.
Maybe conceptually there is, and there is. I have memory. I know what this is. I'm talking on a Zoom call, because how do I know that? It's like a body of knowledge that's been, you could say, sort of carried through time and utilizing sort of, well, I've had other experiences, the mind goes, or consciousness. I've had other experiences that resemble this seemingly, like there's echoes from prior, what I think of as prior moments of talking on a computer with another person that I know. So, but that's all this sort of history, right? And it's an amazingly miraculous thing, as everything is. But it's really fun and illuminating to come back to the bare bones actuality of,
definitely,
like, this instant of this explosion of reality that has no, I would say, pretend as if you've never experienced this before, but I don't have to say pretend, because
you literally haven't.
You could either say, I don't know if I've ever experienced this before, or all I know is this experience. And it's this experience, and our clue that it's always unique is that this experience, this instant, this perception, whatever you want to call it, this moment, this flash of presence, of reality. One of its obvious characteristics that does not take decades of meditation to discover is that it is very unstable. It's radically unstable, in the sense of this flash of experiencing is curiously, it's appearing, you could say, in the flash, is also it's vanishing. Because, it's a perfect kind of real live metaphor for what I'm talking about, or analogy, is that you could say words being spoken, they're like streaming forth, right? So the streaming forth is the appearance of the words, the sound, the arising of sound in the instant. But it's like, as it's arising, as the sound is springing forth, it's going away, isn't it?
Yes.
Sound is like, the words are spoken and then they're gone. In the speaking of them, they're gone. It's very weird. It's like the speaking of them is their manifestation, and simultaneously their destruction.
People might hear that and go, well, no, it seems really solid. But if you really look at it, like, everything is arising and disappearing, like, simultaneously almost. I mean, these words don't even apply because it's happening so, it's just gone.
Literally, yeah. That runs obviously completely counter to virtually all of our conventional notions that suggest there are things that can be named. How can they be named as either objects or experiences or a person, a self? And if what's here is intrinsically, inherently unstable, and just look, I mean, it's everything about this moment, everything that we would call a thought, a sensation, a feeling, it's all in this, you could say, a state of sorts, but the state is not a state of stasis.
No.
Not really a state. It's a state of constant, almost like constant becoming. It's like I've been using this metaphor lately because it feels like a powerful one, just evocative one of like, the time lapse pictures of like flowers opening,
Yes.
It's like this constant opening, but the opening is the becoming. It's becoming in its opening. It's sort of turning into something, but it actually never quite becomes anything definite because it's always, the opening doesn't open and then like, oh, I've arrived at, now this is my form. Here I am. That's kind of how we would conventionally think of like something is born, it takes form, and then it hangs out as that form, right? That's the kind of notion of stability and thingness of reality. That's why they're nouns, right? Because something is born and then it becomes a thing, a noun. But the actual reality, the felt sense of what's here is anything but that. It is completely the opening, the becoming. It's like it's always becoming, but in a sense, it never really becomes anything because it doesn't stop. It just, just look at experience. Like, is it stopping or is it continuously opening into the next unfolding of its apparition, of its appearance? It's ceaseless, isn't it?
And that little ding is gone as well.
That
little wake up call.
Yeah, it's just like the sound. The ding is like, the sounding of the ding is it's disappearing at the same time. I mean, I'm pinpointing in a sense a kind of perspective on what's here that reveals how this has no duration and never really assumes a form, and yet it appears to, and there's no denying that. It appears to assume forms and that have various qualities and shapes, and absolutely. But when investigated, that kind of falls apart because it's this is truly it's truly a shapeshifter. It's just but there's such a freedom in that to feel the way in which it's just constantly becoming the next apparent thing. The moment is becoming it's astonishing to just feel that, to feel the way in which you say, like, okay, we might say that the moment, like a cloud or a body of water, has a certain shape to it, right? I mean, that's how we would describe things, as having certain shapes and forms, text. But if you feel the moment, like, what's the shape of this moment, Well, it's not holding still, is it? So you can't really say what the shape of the moment is, can you? And that is pretty astonishing, that you cannot say what the shape of this moment is, because whatever you say about it is no longer. So how can you say anything about it?
I can't. The moment doesn't hold still, and it's an obvious thing to say. Of course, the moment doesn't hold still, but our language, as you say, is baked right. These ideas into it.
That's what leads us to believe, or leads consciousness to believe, that it can put a limit around it. It can define it, right? So here it is. This is what's happening, and I've just defined it, right? So in a sense, it would be like, you're looking at the cloud, and so what's the shape of the cloud? And you say, well, it looks like this, and you've defined it, right? You've defined the shape. It looks like a horse, or it looks like I don't know, somebody's belly, or but the cloud's not, it won't have any of it because it's not sitting there and remaining in that shape, not for 1 second. So it's like a trick, you know. It's like, well, it looks like it's kind of there, like I seem to be able to kind of capture it, but I have to kind of fool myself and imagine that it's got a kind of stability that it really doesn't have. So if I say that I feel X, Y, or Z, like to describe my experience, it's just like describing the cloud. It's like, describe my experience. It's like, what are you feeling right now? And if I say something like, I feel tired, that's a label to capture or characterize something that's occurring, seemingly. But, okay, so I just labeled what exactly? Like you said, the building blocks. If the building blocks are dynamic, the blocks themselves that make up the experience aren't like physical blocks that seem like they're kind of stable and fixed objects. They're like dancing blocks. They're morphing blocks. So the things that make up tiredness that I'm describing in an instant of like, oh, I feel tired, Paul. It's like that thing that I just described has changed shape already. I mean, faster than I could get the words out about what it is, right? And so, okay, so now what it is? In other words, what I just described isn't here anymore. So how can I describe it if it's changing shape in the instant? How do you, if what you are as a being is just like the cloud or just like a body of water that's its shape is always different. If whatever we think of ourselves as being, but at any level of our supposed selves, personality, thoughts, feelings, sensations, the body, all of it, everything being perceived, you know, the full field of experience that we might think of as ourselves. It's like, are you holding still, like, as a being?
No.
The beingness is it's alive, isn't it? It's not holding still. And so how could you define anything that you call the self? It's like, well, which version? The one that's here right now, but that one just slipped away. So it's like and that's why, you know, you hear the word in Buddhism of the ungraspable nature of this. It's like you can't grasp hold of it because there's not something there to grasp hold of.
The usual words that are thrown around on the spiritual path are bondage and liberation. But if there's no bondage, there's only liberation, because it's everything is liberating as it's arising. You know, it's constantly liberated from itself because it's never itself. It's never final. So how can it be in bondage? Bondage is only an idea, which in itself is also moving. So that idea has already disappeared and moved. And this is the thing, though, it gets incredibly subtle because we're experts at kind of being very broad with our terms and creating a broad picture of what's going on and a stable picture of what's going on.
Absolutely. It's kind of like, it's very sort of, in this sense, it's very imprecise, you know, the way we characterize things, the way we categorize things. It's, you know, it's like useful, it seems, you know, to try to characterize and categorize the phenomena that sort of make up this apparition we call life. I mean, we do it all the time. And I say, well, you know, if you say, what are you looking at outside your window? I would say, you know, I see some trees, right? Among other things. But yeah, the imprecision of language and categorization is just, it's there's no end to how actually limited it is in that regard and how imprecise it actually is, because, you know, everything that it's like everything, really categories of phenomena are complete fictions, because the ability to categorize things, again, is very sloppy. It's like it suggests that I can put you in a category of we'll talk about this, not necessarily having to get into politics, but just to say, a current thing that's occurring a lot is the categorizing of people according to race, right? So if I categorize you racially as white, so what have I just done? I've just like, because you resemble people in certain ways, like, well, what ways? Well, the color of your skin, your ancestry, probably we'll stick with those two for now. But we're talking the color of the skin. It's like, well, the color of your skin isn't like anybody else's. Not exactly.
No. Yeah.
You see how sloppy that is? Well, it's kind of like my color skin. So we get lumped into the same category, and you do the same thing with any other, sort of categorization of people by race, let's call it, right? It's like, well, how you belong in the category when it comes to skin color, let's say, okay? Forget about race, just say skin color. It's like, you belong in the category of that skin color. Because there isn't anything else like it. Not if I look carefully. It's like just a particular shade. It's like, no, it's like a million shades in terms of the color of your skin, right? It's not one shade. I mean, you're just looking at it on a computer screen on pixels. It's like, there's like red, there's pink, there's yellow. When I look at your skin tone, the color of your skin, it's like, and then each one of those I could look more closely, and it's like it just opens up into this like fractal of like a million zillion infinite number of colors, right? So it's like, you see how sloppy language is. It's like, oh, you're white, and I am too. It's like, well, no, you are, or any other thing. If I categorize you as an introvert or an extrovert, it's like these sloppy ways that we describe things. Maybe they're useful, and we do use them a lot in language, but it's like, you take two people and they get lumped together as introverts. No, they are them. They're not an introvert, because there's no one quite like them, even if they may seemingly share certain characteristics with other so-called introverts. It's like the way that actually is enacted for that particular phenomena, i.e. you or me, is like entirely unique to that. So I mean, I'm just using that as an example of the way in which our conceptualizing and languaging of the world is just useful, but actually quite misleading and just not true to the actual phenomena itself, because the phenomena itself is not categorizable, not definable, period. That's not philosophy. It's really not philosophy. And just look and see that the ways we categorize people, places, and things is a nice fantasy, but it's not an actuality. That thing outside my window is not a tree, even if I could place it in the category. It is itself, and there's nothing else like it in the universe.